The sun, perched at its zenith, dominated the small Texan town, wrapping everything in a sweltering embrace. A mixture of humidity and dust created an oppressive atmosphere, forcing residents to seek refuge under air conditioning. On the main avenue, long and straight, like a line etched across the horizon, a dark, gleaming SUV appeared in the distance. The sunlight reflected off the vehicle's impeccably polished surface, creating the illusion it was hovering over the scorching asphalt. Inside the patrol car, Officer Darl Smith felt boredom creeping in as he slowly sipped his iced coffee from a disposable cup. The day had been uneventful. No incidents, no tickets issued, just the intense heat and a serene quiet. Suddenly, a sharp beep disrupted the monotony. The radar registered a speed of 72 miles per hour, well above the 55 miles per hour limit. "Here we go," Smith thought, quickly setting the cup aside. He activated the patrol car's flashing lights and accelerated, initiating pursuit of the speeding vehicle. Hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell. Be the first to know when we drop new videos. The SUV held steady in the main lane, its surface reflecting the evening sun as Darl advanced with determination. Each passing second heightened the tension, the hot asphalt kicking up trails of dust in the air. Smith kept his focus sharp, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, assessing every move of the driver ahead. The normally tranquil town now seemed transformed into the stage of an unexpected chase under the relentless midday heat. As the pursuit unfolded, Darl reflected on the routine that led to these bursts of action. What had started as a peaceful day was now an intense race to fulfill his duty. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, contrasting sharply with the oppressive heat enveloping the town. Each mile brought him closer to an inevitable confrontation, where the decisions made would determine the outcome of the sweltering Texan afternoon. Finally, with skill and resolve, the officer managed to maneuver the SUV to a safe stop. The flashing lights now mirrored the urgency of the moment. Darl parked the car, taking a deep breath before approaching the driver. What had begun under the blazing sun was now closing with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished, reaffirming his commitment to the community's safety. The SUV showed no signs of slowing, but Smith remained confident. In his town, lawbreakers didn't escape the police. His expression turned resolute, a subtle satisfaction etched across his face. Moments like this broke the monotony of an otherwise draining morning. When the vehicle finally halted, Smith hit the brakes firmly and stepped out of the patrol car, instinctively adjusting his belt and hat. The SUV sat motionless, awaiting his approach. The driver's door slowly opened, revealing a tall man dressed in a sharply tailored dark blue suit. His upright posture and composed demeanor drew attention, but Smith paid it no mind. "Let's see who thinks they're so important," the officer thought as he walked toward the car. He stopped a few feet from the driver, bracing for the usual excuses or potential resistance. "Show me your driver's license and vehicle registration," Smith ordered with practiced firmness, never breaking eye contact with the man. The process was routine: request the documents, issue a ticket, and move on. However, as he took the ID, Smith felt a slight tremor in his hand. "What are you waiting for? Click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to be the first to know about our new videos." The document revealed something unexpected. The man's name matched that of a prominent local businessman known for his discreet presence in the community. Smith's mind raced to process the information, balancing professionalism with surprise. He worked to maintain his composure, though his heart pounded fiercely. "Everything seems to be in order, sir. Just a citation for speeding," the officer stated, masking the uncertainty in his voice. The driver smiled calmly and thanked him before returning to the vehicle's interior. Smith observed as the man moved to the back seat, his expression enigmatic. As he returned to his patrol car, Smith mulled over the encounter. Something about this stop felt different, a subtle tension he couldn't quite place. Curious to learn more, he decided to follow the SUV for a few blocks. The silent pursuit continued, with both vehicles moving through the quiet streets under the unrelenting heat. As they drove on, Smith noticed the driver taking unexpected detours, steering toward less populated parts of town. Doubt began to creep in. Was there more to this simple traffic violation? Determined to uncover the truth, the officer sharpened his focus, ready to act should anything else unfold in this seemingly ordinary afternoon. The name General Lewis Johnson echoed in Smith's mind as he read it aloud, incredulous at what he saw. Johnson had been a frequent name in the headlines, celebrated for his military missions abroad and revered by many as a national hero. Yet Smith refused to be swayed by such reflections. His chest thumped with a mix of indignation and determination to uphold justice. "Are you aware of the violation you committed?" Smith declared sternly, ignoring the honorific title on the document. The man before him maintained his composure, showing no sign of nervousness. "Speeding," Johnson replied, tilting his head slightly. His tone was calm and measured, reflecting someone accustomed to handling situations with composure. That serenity, rather than soothing Smith, only fueled his frustration. His mind raced. Why is he so calm? Does he think he's untouchable? Smith had always distrusted people like Johnson, powerful, influential, successful. They seemed to believe the rules didn't apply to them. "Hands on the vehicle," Smith barked abruptly, raising his voice. Johnson hesitated for a brief moment, but realized resisting would only escalate the situation. Without objection, he complied. Internally, though, Smith felt his anger boiling over. This encounter was an opportunity to vent the tension he carried within. There was a darker side to his personality, always waiting for an excuse to surface, and he found justification in this man. Someone who, in Smith's eyes, exuded overconfidence and pride. As Smith maintained firm control of the situation, his mind replayed each previous interaction, trying to decipher Johnson's unshakable demeanor. The tension between the two was palpable, every gesture carrying silent weight. Smith knew this moment could define his perception of his role and those, like Johnson, who held positions of power in the community. Under the blazing Texas sun, the small town silently observed a standoff that transcended a simple traffic violation. It was a clash of egos, of perspectives on justice and authority, reflecting the complexities of human relationships in a mundane setting. Smith took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure as he weighed his next steps. This encounter was far from over, and he knew the decisions made here could have lasting repercussions for both himself and Johnson. The town remained under the intense heat, witnessing a drama that went beyond busy streets, touching the depths of human emotions. Be a part of the family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to join our awesome community and get notified of every new upload. Smith stepped toward the general and, with a brusque motion, grabbed his wrist, twisting his arm behind his back. Johnson's gaze remained cold and inscrutable, but he did not resist. "Why are you doing this?" Johnson asked, turning his head to face the officer. His calm demeanor began to stir deeper emotions in Smith. Feelings of fear and unease he refused to acknowledge. "We need to inspect your vehicle for any illegal items," Smith replied, though there was no legitimate reason to suspect anything. In his mind, this approach was already justified, just another person relying on the system to protect them. This time, however, Smith decided no connections or influence would shield the man. General Johnson didn't protest, but when Smith attempted to place the cuffs on him, something unexpected happened. At that moment, another police car from a different department drove by. Smith failed to notice when another officer parked nearby, observing the situation. "Darl, what's going on?" a voice called out. It was Lieutenant Rodriguez, one of the few people Smith respected in town. "I'm detaining a violator," Smith muttered, barely glancing at his colleague. He continued trying to secure the cuffs. "Who's the violator?" Rodriguez approached, his eyes widening as he recognized Johnson's face. "Darl, that's General Johnson," Rodriguez exclaimed, gesturing for Smith to stop. "So what?" Smith shot back, but his voice carried a tinge of uncertainty. He sensed something was off but couldn't pinpoint what. The moment he heard the general's name, an instinct told him to stand down, but he ignored it. Rodriguez, on the other hand, realized the situation had reached a critical point. You don't treat people like this, especially not based on prejudices. Johnson's a hero. Do you really think he did something serious enough to warrant arrest? Rodriguez questioned, stepping closer. Smith's heart raced. Something was definitely wrong. An inner voice urged him to stop, but pride and stubbornness wouldn't let him admit his mistake. He cast a quick glance at Rodriguez before turning his attention back to Johnson, who remained calm. At that moment, the small Texas town bore witness to a conflict that went beyond a mere traffic violation. The tension between Smith's sense of duty and personal justice peaked, reflecting the complexities of human interactions and the weight of power dynamics in the community. Smith took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure as he reflected on his next steps. He knew this encounter could redefine his understanding of his role as an officer and of those, like Johnson, who held influence and respect in the city. Under the intense midday heat, the decision he made now would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Smith didn't care about the individual's identity. Regardless of who he is, he exclaimed, struggling to maintain his composure. No citizen is above the law. Rodriguez paused briefly, searching for the right words to defuse the tense atmosphere. He knew Smith's personality well. Always direct and sometimes overly strict, especially when dealing with authority figures. However, in this moment, it was clear Smith was making a mistake. Listen, Rodriguez began calmly, trying to ease the tension. Maybe you're misinterpreting this, Darl. Let's talk. Let him go, and we'll resolve this properly. Are you mocking me? Smith snapped, spinning toward Rodriguez, his voice laced with aggression. This man clearly thinks he can do whatever he wants. Look at him, standing there like nothing's wrong. Who knows if he's transporting illegal substances or weapons in the car? Johnson finally turned to face Smith. His expression remained composed, but there was a glint of disappointment in his eyes. Officer, he began calmly, my only infraction was speeding, and I take full responsibility for it. However, if you think you can intimidate me because of my color, you're sorely mistaken. Johnson's words hit Smith like a punch. His eyes narrowed, and anger began to surface. He couldn't stand being challenged, especially by someone he had already prejudged. You're not getting away with this, Smith threatened, stepping closer. Before he could act, Rodriguez firmly grabbed his arm. Darl, enough, he commanded with authority. You're making a grave mistake. Smith froze for a moment before jerking away. What are you doing, Rodriguez? I'm in charge here. This man broke the law, and I'm handling it. Rodriguez sighed deeply, knowing words alone wouldn't stop his colleague. He pulled out his phone and began recording the situation. Smith caught the peripheral movement, and a fresh wave of fury surged through him. What are you doing? He shouted. I'm documenting everything as evidence, Rodriguez replied coldly. If you keep this up, you'll dig yourself into a deeper hole. At that moment, an additional sound shattered the tension. A car parked across the street, and a man in a suit stepped out. Someone Smith didn't recognize immediately. As the man approached, it became clear he was a local journalist. He pulled out a camera and began recording the scene, further increasing the pressure on Smith. I'm not finished yet, Smith muttered through gritted teeth, though his voice faltered, betraying his internal uncertainty. He was still trying to maintain control. Even as everything seemed to slip away, the spectators began murmuring among themselves. Some had already pulled out their phones, recording every second of the unfolding drama. The exposure Smith had desperately wanted to avoid was now inevitable. He was no longer in control. His actions were now public, and Rodriguez's camera only reinforced that fact. A chilling realization hit Smith. One mistake could end his career on the spot. Taking a deep breath, he finally let go of the general's arm. Fine, Smith growled, struggling to suppress his anger. You can go. Johnson remained still, studying Smith intently. "You're lucky I'm not filing a complaint," the general stated firmly. "But remember, it's not because you were right, but because someone needed to show you how to act correctly." Smith didn't respond. He turned and walked slowly back to his patrol car, feeling the weight of the crowd stares. As he sat down, gripping the steering wheel tightly, his hands visibly trembled. He knew this wasn't just a singular misstep. It was the beginning of an inevitable end. As Johnson calmly climbed back into his SUV and drove away, Rodriguez approached Smith. "You really crossed a line, Darl," Rodriguez said, his tone serious. "I recorded everything. If you hadn't stopped, this would have been the end of your career." Smith remained silent, staring straight ahead. He didn't know that the footage was already circulating online. Within days, he would face the wrath of his superiors and public scorn. On his home TV screen, his face and actions would be dissected live, transforming him from a respected officer into a despised antihero. At the police station, silence hung heavy in the air. Colleagues avoided his gaze, whispering behind his back. Smith entered his office, trying to lose himself in the monotony of work, but the image of Johnson lingered in his mind. He knew this was only the beginning of something far larger, and that something was already out of his control. The ringing of his phone broke the oppressive silence. Turning to his desk, Smith saw the name on the screen, Lieutenant Rodriguez. Slowly, he picked up, bracing for a difficult conversation. "Yeah," he said curtly. "Darl, we need to talk," Rodriguez said seriously, his tone cold. "Have you seen what's happening online?" "I've seen it," Smith replied, too drained to elaborate. "We've got bad news," Rodriguez continued. "The department has launched an official investigation. This is serious, Darl. It's not just a complaint. They're reviewing all your cases from the past few years." The words echoed in Smith's mind, sending a chill down his spine. "All my cases?" His heart raced, and the air around him felt heavier. If they conducted a full review, his career, no, his entire life, could unravel. "You know what this means," Rodriguez added in a low voice. "They're going to dig deep, and if they find anything—" Smith tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. His throat was dry, his thoughts scrambled. He hung up and sank back into his chair, staring blankly ahead. The stories he had heard about colleagues under investigation now felt all too real. It was always someone else, never him. Now, he was trapped in the same nightmare. The next morning, a loud knock at the door woke Smith. He got up slowly, feeling the weight of the world on his body. Opening the door, he found two men in suits. One introduced himself as an FBI agent. "Officer Smith," one asked dryly, though he already knew the answer. Smith nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We'd like to ask you some questions about the incident with General Johnson," the agent added, showing neither empathy nor respect. Smith stepped aside, inviting them in. The men sat in his living room, facing him. A heavy silence filled the air, and the tension peaked. "Let's start with the basics. Why did you stop General Johnson?" one agent began. Smith tried to gather his thoughts. He remembered the speeding violation, but now it felt like a flimsy justification. "He was speeding," he finally replied. "Yes, we know that," the agent confirmed with a nod. "But we want to understand why your actions went beyond standard procedure. Why did you use force when it wasn't necessary?" Smith clenched his fist tightly. The questions only amplified his guilt and shame. He couldn't admit the real reason. His actions had been driven by anger and prejudice. "I was just following my instincts," he murmured. He seemed too confident. "I thought he was hiding something." "And you decided that justified the use of force?" the second agent asked, his tone icy. Smith stayed silent, feeling cornered. He could claim it was a misunderstanding, but it wouldn't change anything. "We'll proceed with the investigation," the agent said finally, rising from his seat. "Expect further instructions, and we recommend you hire an attorney." Smith nodded slowly, watching the agents leave. As soon as the door closed, he collapsed to the floor, burying his head in his hands. What have I done? Days passed, and the situation only worsened. Every day, the news replayed the incident, showing new snippets of the video and zooming in on Smith's face. People in town stopped greeting him, and some neighbors openly avoided him. But the most unexpected blow came when Smith, sitting at his computer, stumbled across a live broadcast. It was General Johnson giving a speech. The general spoke calmly, but each word struck a nerve. "This incident is not just an insult to my dignity," Johnson said. "It's a demonstration of how the system can oppress and humiliate people based on their appearance. I don't want this to be about me alone. I want this to spark a conversation about police reform and how we can change the system for the better." Smith stared at the screen, Johnson's words piercing him like arrows. He thought about how everything could have been different. What if I had just let him go? But there was no turning back now. Smith shut off the computer and stood up, feeling as though the world around him was closing in. He couldn't take it anymore. He needed to leave the city, to forget all of this. But no matter where he went, the consequences of his actions would follow. He walked to the window and gazed out at the street. In the distance, he noticed a car driving slowly. Inside were the same agents who had visited him earlier. His life was no longer his own. Every move he made, every word he spoke, would be scrutinized. And this was only the beginning. Closing his eyes, Smith tried to find an answer. But the truth was clear. He had already lost. Days later, Smith was called back to the precinct, but the atmosphere was entirely different. He felt the weight of his colleagues' stares. Some avoided eye contact. Others whispered as he passed. The silence was louder than any direct accusation. Entering his office, he sat at his desk, attempting to focus on routine tasks, but his thoughts kept circling back to the same place. General Johnson. The general's calm, confident face seemed to haunt him. Smith knew this was no small incident. It had spiraled into something far larger. It was as if every decision he had made that day was now completely out of his control. Not long after, Captain Harkness entered the office, his expression grim. Without a word, he dropped another file on Smith's desk. "Darl," Harkness began, his tone firm but subdued, "this has gone to the higher-ups. It's no longer just an internal investigation. They're reviewing every case you've been involved in over the past several years." A chill ran down Smith's spine. He could barely comprehend what he was hearing. "They're going to go through everything," Harkness continued. "Every report, every intervention. If they find anything questionable or irregular, it'll be the end of the line." Smith tried to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The thought of years of work unraveling left him paralyzed. "You need a lawyer," Harkness said, leaving the office without waiting for a reply. Smith sat frozen for a long time, staring at the file on his desk. He knew he was no longer just a cop facing a mistake. He had become a symbol, an example of the system's failures. And that was something he couldn't change, no matter how much he wanted to. That night, Smith went home with an unbearable weight on his shoulders. He knew that every decision he had made in recent days was being watched, analyzed, and judged, not just by his superiors, but by the entire community and the public at large. He turned on the television again, only to be greeted by another interview with General Johnson. "This isn't an isolated case," Johnson was saying. "It's not just about me or this incident. It's a reflection of a larger issue, of a culture that allows these situations to keep happening. This is something we can't ignore." Smith felt anger bubbling up again, mixed with despair. He turned off the TV and slumped onto the couch, trying to shake the feeling that his life was spiraling out of control. But with every passing moment, the pressure only grew. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, messages, and calls he didn't have the courage to answer. The next day, as he walked through the city, he noticed how much things had changed. People who used to greet him now avoided his gaze. Some whispered. Others looked at him with open disapproval. He was no longer just Officer Darl Smith. He was the man who had gone up against a national hero and lost. The final blow came when he saw a headline in the local newspaper. The title was clear and direct: Police in Crisis. The incident with General Johnson and its fallout. Smith read the article, feeling the weight of every word. There he was, described as the embodiment of systemic failure, a symbol of what needed to change. When he returned home, he finally broke down. Sitting in his living room, Smith realized that no matter how much he tried to justify his actions, the world around him had already delivered its verdict. He had lost everything: respect, trust, and most painfully, the chance to make things right. In the following days, the situation only worsened. The case gained national attention, and every detail of his actions was dissected in the news and on social media. Smith tried to ignore the accusing looks and whispered comments, but the tension was crushing. He could barely sleep or eat, his mind spinning endlessly, reliving that day over and over, wondering where it had all gone wrong. One morning, as he tried to gather himself, there was a loud knock at the door. Opening it, he saw the same two FBI agents from before. "Mr. Smith, we need you to come with us for further questioning," one of the agents said in the same cold tone as before. Smith didn't resist. He knew there was nothing he could do to change his situation. Sitting in an interrogation room, he faced hours of questions, not just about the incident with General Johnson, but about other cases throughout his career. Each question seemed to cut deeper, exposing flaws he preferred to forget. Returning home, Smith turned on the TV and saw Johnson again, now on a talk show. The general looked calm, but his words carried immense weight. "This isn't just about one specific incident," Johnson said. "It's part of a larger issue, a system that enables abuse of power and discrimination. We need real reform, and we won't stop until something changes." Johnson's words resonated across the nation. Smith turned off the TV and sat in the dark, feeling his world crumble. He had lost control of his own narrative, becoming a mere symbol of the systemic flaws he had once sworn to protect. Days later, Smith received official notification from the precinct. His suspension had been made permanent. There was no way back. His career, the reputation he had spent years building, and his life as he knew it were all falling apart. He searched for ways to move forward, but he knew that no matter where he went, his name and actions would haunt him. Every attempt to rebuild his life seemed futile. The memories of that day haunted him, and the public's perception of his actions isolated him further. Smith understood that, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the consequences of his choices. His identity as a police officer had been replaced by the image of a man who abused his power, leaving deep scars on both his career and his soul. As he struggled to come to terms with his reality, Smith wondered if redemption was even possible. The shadow of his actions loomed over every aspect of his existence, making it nearly impossible to find peace. He knew he needed to face his mistakes, but the weight of guilt made every step toward redemption feel insurmountable. The city, once familiar and welcoming, now felt alien and hostile. People avoided his gaze, and whispers followed him everywhere he went. Smith realized it wasn't just the loss of his job that devastated him. It was the shattering of his own identity. He had become a negative example, a constant reminder of the injustices he had perpetuated. In his lonely nights, he reflected on how he had reached this point. If I could go back, would I do it differently? Maybe, but the past couldn't be undone. Smith understood that the path to redemption would be long and arduous, demanding more than mere regret. It would require him to rebuild lost trust and confront the inner demons that had driven him to act so destructively. As life moved forward relentlessly, Smith decided that, despite everything, he wouldn't let that incident completely define who he was. With renewed determination, he began searching for ways to repair the damage he had caused, knowing the road ahead would be difficult but necessary for finding some measure of peace and redemption.